So here's another game that was near the top of my most requested list, Land of Eam, often described as Lord of the Rings meets the Muppets, which at first made me think of the Dark Crystal. But while there might be some thematic similarities, generally Land of Eam is much lighter and wackier and has more of a webcomic tone like Nimona or Order of the Stick. In fact, the setting started life as a YA graphic novel series called Rickety Stitch and the Gelatinous Goo. It's interesting, I think, that the designers picked something as jarring as The Lord of the Rings meets the Muppets to represent that fiction of the world, because the mechanics of the game are kind of like that too, drawing heavily on both OSR and narrative influences to create an unholy Frankenstein's monster of a game that, it turns out, works really well. And on top of that, the Mucklands campaign setting is straight up the best designed RPG setting book I have ever encountered by quite a long way. So, if you'll follow me along this journey, I want to show how this picking and choosing of design philosophies like items from a buffet ended up creating one of the most soloable games I've ever come across, despite clearly not being intended that way. So I have the standard box set. It's a slipcase that contains 3 hardbacks, the core book, a bestiary, and the Mucklands campaign setting. It also has an absolutely gorgeous and super detailed hex map of the Mucklands that folds up like a board game board. Every book is packed full of vibrant illustrations, usually in this comic style. Every creature in the bestiary is illustrated, as is nearly every page of the 400-page setting guide with location maps and portraits of literally hundreds of NPCs. The layout is all so easy to read and filled with super creative and amusing writing. And something I want to praise here is how the writing respects your time. It's a bit difficult to describe, but a lot of setting-focused games will front-load their lore and history, but in Land of Eam, you only seem to encounter and need to read what's relevant to the situation you're in right now. So, talking of lore and history, despite its bright aesthetic, like the Dark Crystal, Eam is one of those worlds where the Dark Lord won. At some point in the mysterious past, the Gloom King brought down the civilizations of old, and after a period of wild Mad Max-esque lawlessness, the Mucklands is entering an industrial era called the Dungeon Age, where companies and warlords struggle for control of the land and its resources. That's more or less all you need to know to start playing the game. You then open the map and pick a starting location. The incredible setting book will give you all the info you need to jump into a game right there. As an example, I picked Junktown in my game, based on nothing but the name and the fact that my character's homeland, Fleabag County, is around here. So you go to the Junktown section of the book, where it gives you a short overview of what's going on in this location. So in this case, Tabitha Towertop has ambitions to secede from Fleabag County and become queen of a new kingdom of junk, but she'll have to contend with the Undermongers gang in the sewers and the slumbering giant under the mountain of trash that makes up most of the town. Then there's a map with loads of little districts. Each district has its own rumours, wacky NPCs, quests and services. The quests are marked with these icons to indicate their tone. Whimsical, silly events have a smiley face, adventures have a torch, and slightly darker stories have a skull. There's even a main questline called the Undermongers Rise with 4 parts in Junktown. My character owed their life to the Undermonger, so before taking a side in that conflict, I decided to take a lighter quest with a bit of travelling to try out those rules. Every NPC has a portrait, and most have associated quests, so you can just pick someone based on the portrait and see what they're up to. Nancy Norrie looked jovial, so I checked her quest. Turns out she's found a Felmog coin in the river that might be valuable, but she needs a Felmog outrider to confirm it. So we went on a journey across the Forlorn Fields, which is a region with its own unique features and quests, and eventually got to Bogtown, where we hope to find a Felmog outrider. And of course, Bogtown has just as much going on as Junktown does. This book, The Mucklands, is near perfect in how usable it is. In my opinion, it's absolutely the gold standard for what a campaign setting book should look like. I've never encountered a setting that you can just pick up and start playing as quickly as this before. Designers, take notes. Character creation starts with the familiar process of picking a class, a folk, and a homeland. If I'm completely honest, some of the 6 classes didn't quite land for me. 3 of them focus on the kinds of abilities I find a little awkward in games, like mounts for the knight errant, retainers for the dungeoneer, or picking a best buddy in the party for the loyal chum. Then there's the gnome, which is the only class resembling a spellcaster, but they're both a class and an ancestry. I get the impression there's probably a lore reason for that from the graphic novels, but it feels a little old-fashioned for me. So with Bard and Rascal remaining, I picked Rascal. Something to note here is how a good portion of the class abilities have these collaborative storytelling elements, like the Rascal's level 1 Sticky Fingers ability, which lets you pickpocket an NPC and declare what it is you stole. Next, there are loads of playable ancestries, and humans are a rarity in the land of Eam, the most ubiquitous folk being the Boggart and their cousins, the Goblins and Boggles. That actually helps with that Jim Henson tone, where there's a big cast of weird and diverse characters, and maybe an occasional human. I picked a shrew-like folk who often like to tinker with gadgets, which let me pick and modify a tool from a massive table of items. So obviously I ended up with a lucky grappling hook. The homeland gives you some more equipment and a proficiency, and you'll start to notice at this point the encumbrance and survival rules creeping in, with rations and inventory slots. So after those narrative storytelling elements in the class abilities, now it's time for some old school stuff, as you'll need to calculate your maximum equip load. And talking of which, it's time to assign and tweak some attribute scores and various derived stats. There's 4 main attributes that govern 4 skills: Vim, Vigour, Knack, and Know-how. HP and damage are reflavoured here as Courage and Dread. Each class gets its own specific Dread die, which, again, feels very old school. But then we're back to that narrative style with the story elements. Each class has a unique pick or roll table for backstory, ideals, flaws, personal quest, and relationships, which feels a lot like Powered by the Apocalypse style playbooks instead of perhaps one big rollable table like you might see in OSR games. I'm hoping you might get the sense of what I was talking about in the introduction, this buffet of design philosophies on display here. The rules of Eam are pretty easy to pick up, and the adventuring section is only a short chapter in the core book. We're rolling a d12 for our checks and adding our skill bonuses, but instead of an old school style of setting a DC and passing or failing, we have a static 5 degrees of success. Complete failure on a 1 or 2, failure with a plus on a 3 to 5, success with a twist on 6 to 8, a straight success on a 9 to 11, and a complete success on a 12 plus. And that's essentially the same for every kind of roll, whether it's a basic skill check, a travel roll, attack roll, or gathering and crafting. Again, it's a very narrative way of doing things, and something I appreciate is how for some of the results there's a d6 table you can roll on to get more detail about what happens. But going back to the old school, the travelling system works perfectly with the Mucklands map and takes place in turns. For every turn that you want to move across the map, you make a travelling check, and depending on the result, roll on region-specific random tables for a fun prompt on what actually happens. And there are resting activities that can take a certain number of turns too. If you end up in conflict, there's a very structured board game-like way that it plays out, in 4 phases per round. There's parley, improvise, run, and combat. Every player chooses what they want to do this round, so if a player wants to talk their way out of a situation, they go first and get a chance to de-escalate. Enemies have a parley score that determines how often you can try to talk them down. And if that doesn't work, any players with a creative plan go next. Maybe you want to set a trap or use the environment to your advantage or something like that. Next, if the conflict is going badly, you can try to flee. And phase 4 is combat, with only the players who haven't yet acted this round taking part. The idea here is to encourage more social or outside-the-box solutions to conflict rather than just fighting to the death, and I think it works quite well. In my game, for example, on our way to Bogtown through the Forlorn Fields region, I rolled a 2 on my travel check. So I go to the Perilous Encounters section and roll a d12 on the Fleabag County table. I rolled a 5. While in a tavern, a bitter rival from a PC's past sits down at the same table and looks the PC square in the eye as they draw a knife. You've got a lot of nerve coming back around here. I decided the game wants me to try to solve this non-violently, and at this stage I didn't even have a weapon, so I played it cool and rolled up an NPC. This was Val the Goblin Sailor, who wears a mirror mask. I turned on the charm and said, "Yeah, but I notice you still can't even show your face around here." I rolled a natural 12 on the charm check, and Val laughed and shook my hand, old grudges set aside, and ended up accompanying us as a friendly companion the rest of the way to Bogtown. On the back of the book, it says for 2 to 6 players. It's clearly not intended for solo play, and yet, if it said for 1 to 6 players, they wouldn't need a single extra rule. I don't know for certain if this was an accident, but in picking this specific combination of old school and narrative systems, they've created a fully contained solo game. The set difficulties mean you don't have to choose a difficulty for each roll. The degrees of success are perfect for driving the story and answering what happens next. The vast numbers of rollable tables make generating content or prompts simple and easy. Hex crawl style travel mechanics are notoriously used in loads of solo games for that sense of progression. And having each location filled with NPCs and quests ready and waiting for you is just perfection. And maybe it wasn't an accident. Because one way you could summarize Soloability is by saying the game is easy to run without a GM, and not coincidentally, if your aim is to design a game that massively reduces the demand and creative load on a GM, you might end up at the same point. So I've looked at this wrong, from the perspective of someone who tends to try out games solo. Maybe the headline should be that this is a game that reduces the workload of both GMs and players without ever oversimplifying and ending up as something you can pick up and start playing at any moment without any prep needed and just a basic understanding of the rules and the world. Something I want to briefly mention is the price of admission, at least in part because of how the Mucklands book is so good that it's nearly essential to the experience. This standard box set that I have costs around $100, but Exalted Funeral seems to be focusing more on the deluxe box set, which costs around $150. That's quite an ask if you're not sure about the game. Now, if you want to try it out first, there is a free option that I've discovered. you can grab the Quick Start Guide, the digital hex map, and the free Mucklands setting sample, which I believe coincidentally has all of Junktown in it. That, I think, should be enough to get a feel for the game and to start a campaign in Junktown without coughing up big money. There's a lot of stuff in here that I barely touched on. An intro adventure in the core book, a massive crafting system if you're into that kind of thing, the fully illustrated bestiary where the stats are simple and each creature has an entry for how they're likely to behave in the parley phase, and the dozens of weird factions to interact with like Nork's Noodle Gang, the Puddle Jumpers Association, and Subterranean Pits and Lairs LLC. Sure, I didn't enjoy the classes very much, but that's massively overshadowed with how happy I was to be able to sit down and play this game whenever I was in the mood for some whimsical silliness. No prep, no creative demands, no worrying about lore details. Just pick a location and enter the land of Eam. So that's the third of the big 4 requested videos. Wanderhome, Ryutama, Land of Eam, and I know I keep teasing Koriko, and I will get to it eventually. But in the meantime, I can't recommend Matt Risby's video on it enough over at The Bad Spot, so if you're impatient, go and check that out. And of course, it was the amazingly generous supporters on Ko-fi who helped make this video possible, letting me buy this copy of the standard box set. So thank you so much. If you feel able and eager to support what I do here and help make this kind of review possible, then please head over to kofi.com/cozyrpgreviews. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to discover a new game every couple of weeks or so. Thank you ever so much for watching, and until next time, happy adventures!